Welcome back to Law&Crime Daily, everybody. A tech executive behind huge companies like Cash App and Square was murdered on the streets of San Francisco this week, and so far, police have not released any information about a suspect or motive. Bob Lee was found with stab wounds around 2:30 a.m. on Tuesday and died at a hospital. Local media reports that Lee managed to call 911 on his cell phone saying that he'd been stabbed and needed help. And surveillance video shows him walking up to a parked car that had its hazard lights on. He lifted his shirt, presumably to show the person inside that he was injured, but the car drove away. He managed to walk another few feet before ultimately collapsing. Lee created the payment service Cash App while he was working with another payment company, Square. He was also involved in cryptocurrency firms like Mobile Coin. Lee's family says the father of two moved to Miami last fall. He was back in San Francisco for a leadership summit and to meet up with a few friends. Terry, really sad case here. You know, the report said that at least one person drove away. They declined to help Lee. I'm thinking that person could be liable in some way. Am I right?
Well, actually, in California, no, he is not liable for driving away. There is a law in California, it's a Good Samaritan law, but basically under the law, you have the right to drive away and do absolutely nothing. You cannot be charged criminally, you cannot be charged civilly. And if you do stop and help, because what they want to do is to promote the fact that you should help people if they are in need of emergency aid, then you also cannot be held civilly liable if, in fact, you're not doing it to get money. So if a doctor stops and there's some negligence, then you could be sued. But if you're doing it in good faith, you're not expecting any money, and you're not willfully trying to hurt the person, then you're not going to be held liable either.
Brian, the San Francisco police chief is 100% confident that they're going to find the suspect. You think they should be?
Well, usually, Jesse, I would say you shouldn't be 100% confident in anything, but according to their own statistics, there's an 80 to 85% clearance rate for homicides. That's high just generally, but also high when you look at other clearance rates of other departments. The other reason why I think this case specifically may be more solvable than others is the very fact that there's around so many office buildings. I think they would be able to piece together a number of surveillance videos to get at least the make and model of the vehicle, kind of think of how they got Brian Koberger through tracking his vehicle. And I think it's a matter of time until they find out who the suspect is in this case.
Well, I hope they're right, you know, because this is really a case that needs answers. Now, when you hear this case, it might actually remind you of a different murder that happened on the opposite coast. A young woman was murdered in Queens, New York in the 1960s, and she's remembered as the victim who died as her neighbors watched and did nothing. But that's not actually the whole story. In 1964, Kitty Genovese was a 28-year-old bartender. According to historical accounts and trial testimony, she was walking from a parking lot to her apartment late at night when a man chased her and stabbed her twice in the back. A neighbor leaned out his window and shouted at the suspect, and he eventually ran off, but that suspect came back about 10 minutes later, attacking Genovese again behind the building out of the sight of the apartment windows. At least two people reported that they called police, and an elderly woman even stayed with the dying victim until help got there. Now, despite this, about 2 weeks after the killing, a New York Times headline read, "37 who saw murder didn't call police." Police later questioned Winston Moseley about the attack, and he admitted to killing and raping Genovese along with at least two other women. He went to prison and died there in 2016. Now, from that New York Times story came the idea of the bystander effect. Psychologists theorized that no one helped because they all assumed someone else would. The case became a very popular part of social psychology textbooks for decades afterwards in both the United States and the UK until it was debunked. We've got a brand new case starting up next week in Columbus, Ohio that we want to talk to you about. A former Vice Squad police detective is standing trial for a second time in the murder of a sex worker while allegedly undercover. In 2018, investigators say defendant Andrew Mitchell picked up the victim, 23-year-old Donna Castleberry, in an unmarked squad car. Mitchell then tried to arrest Castleberry, who engaged in sex work in the area. Audio recordings reportedly show that Castleberry didn't believe that Mitchell was a police officer. He was reportedly dressed in plain clothing and didn't have his badge or police radio on him, which actually violates department policy. Investigators say that there was a scuffle inside the car and Castleberry slashed the defendant's hand with a knife. That is when police say Mitchell shot Castleberry 3 times and she was later pronounced dead at the hospital. Mitchell was initially tried last year, and he said on the stand that he acted in self-defense. That trial ended in a hung jury and ultimately a mistrial. Mitchell is also charged federally with arresting sex workers and then forcing them to engage in sex acts in exchange for their freedom. In the death of Castleberry, Mitchell faces up to life in prison if convicted. Jury selection is scheduled to start on Monday. So Terry, the defendant being charged with murder and voluntary manslaughter, what's the difference between the two charges here?
Well, first of all, I've just got to say what a horrible case this is. But murder in Ohio is different than voluntary manslaughter, but they both have that requirement for that element of intent, meaning that they intended to kill someone. But with voluntary manslaughter, what you have is sort of a situation where there's this excited, aggravated rage, and you just sort of make this act without really trying to do it in any premeditated way. Here, I don't think that they're going to be able to show, or I hope they don't show, that it is manslaughter, because this seemed to me to be a premeditated murder. He intended to kill her. He put her in that back seat. Why was she even in the car? And frankly, these other charges against him, to me, all add up to the highest crime that he could possibly be committed of, and that would be murder. So of both of those choices, hopefully the prosecution is going to be able to show that he really intended to take her out because he was upset that she attacked him.
Well, Brian, unless I'm missing something, it's likely going to be the same witnesses presenting the same evidence. Why would there be a difference this time around?
I think the defense has the advantage in a first case of the element of surprise. They can spring upon the prosecution arguments that they might not have thought about. I think this time the prosecution's got to refocus the case and make the argument that you cannot claim self-defense if you're doing something illegal. Let me answer some of Terry's questions. This man was a John. He's a person who purchases sex from sex workers, because if you're arresting someone, you don't arrest them in the back of a car. You arrest them outside of the car, you check them for weapons, they're handcuffed, you place them in the back seat, you go in the front seat, and you drive them to the precinct. There's no reason for the officer to be in the back seat with this person when they're not handcuffed. He was there for a reason, and he shot her. He was doing something illegal, not self-defense.
All right. Brian, Terry, thank you both so much. Everyone out there, thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We're going to see you next time as we discuss justice in America.